Now that we're finished with the price elasticity of demand, we can move on to some of the other elasticities of demand. So the first one that we'll look at is the cross-price elasticity of demand. Now that sounds kind of strange, but basically what the cross-price elasticity of demand is what it's answering the question for us. What is the impact on the quantity demanded of a particular product created by the change in price on a related product? So that's what we mean by cross, is that it's another different product. So our basic equation is the elasticity of X. X is going to signify that this is the cross price elasticity of demand. That equals the percent change, the quantity bought and sold of good A, divided by the percent change in the price of product B. Now, most of the time when we consider or we use the cross price elasticity of demand, we're going to be dealing with similar products. So basically, think of an example of like chicken and beef. We can consider them substitutes. That if you're cooking dinner at home and you want a good source of protein for your meal, you may choose between steak and chicken. So the cross price elasticity of demand for beef would say, okay, what is the effect in the quantity of beef that's being sold with the change in the price of chicken? Other instances could be substitutes, so like coffee and energy drinks, or Xboxes and PlayStation, butter and margarine, things that serve the same use. Although it can also be used for complementary goods. So remember, goods that are used together. So if you're I don't know, if you're like Sheets and you're selling soda, you may wonder what the cross price elasticity of demand is for other munchies that people buy when they buy soda. So, potato chips, pretzels, candy, things like that. So the cross price elasticity of demand is for related goods, either substitute goods or complementary goods. Just like with the typical price elasticity of demand, we have a problem with that simple equation with the denominators. Again, going in one direction, so from say change in price from $12 to $14, you get a different answer than if you go from $14 to $12 and do the reverse. Because of that, we need a more complex denominator. Again, we need to take the average of the quantity of the change in quantity, or the average of the quantity and the average of the price. So to go through the equation again, so it's EX, or the elasticity for the cross price elasticity of demand, equals the change in quantity, so Q2 minus Q1 for product A, divided by the average of the quantity for product 1, or product A. All of that is going to be divided, the change in price for product B, so P2 minus P1, divided by the average price for product B. So now what about the coefficients? The coefficients for the regular price elasticity of demand were negative. But the sign for the cross price elasticity of demand for substitutes and complements are going to be different. So let's look at the price elasticity of demand for substitutes. So consider soft drinks being sold in a supermarket versus a convenience store like Sheets. A decrease in the price for the supermarket soft drinks is going to cause the quantity of soft drinks sold in Sheets in a mini mart to decrease. And if the supermarket raises their prices, consumers are going to purchase more from Sheets in that Unimart. So the sign in the cross elasticity for substitutes is going to be positive. On the other hand, the cross price elasticity for complements is negative. That should make more sense. So a decrease in soft drink prices at Sheets, or Unimart like Sheets, is going to increase the snack food sales, excuse me. Now, if there's an increase in the soft drink prices at Sheets, that's going to cause a decrease in the sales for snack foods. Now let's just look at two examples for the cross price elasticity of demand. So the cross price elasticity of demand for residential demand for electric energy. So compare that to the prices of gas energy. The price elasticity of demand for electric energy is going to be low. So economists have estimated about 0.13, positive 0.13. Now, the cross-price elasticity of demand for beef with respect to pork prices is expected to be about 0.25. With respect to the price of chicken, it's estimated to be about 1.2. Now, both of these numbers being positive and being within that range indicates that the products are substitutes for each other. We can also calculate the elasticity of demand for a change in consumers' income. So the income elasticity of demand is the percentage change in the quantity demanded caused by a 1% change in income. So the elasticity equals E. Y is our subscript here. It's going to be the shorthand for income. That equals the percent change in the quantity demanded divided by the percent change in income. Now, just like before, we have the same issues with the denominators here. So what we're going to do is use the expanded equation, and that's included in the book. So the Q2 minus Q1 divided by the average of the quantities, divided by Y2 minus Y1, divided by the average of Y's, or the income. So the income elasticity can either be positive or negative. Now, for most products that we encounter, we're going to expect the income elasticity to be positive because if you think about it, an increase in income, a person's going to end up spending more. When the income inelasticity is positive, we say the good is a normal good. When it's zero, we call that good, we say that demand is independent of income. So, price elasticity of, or income elasticity of demand, equals zero, then it's independent of income. Income does not have an effect on consumer demand. Now, there are some special cases where it's negative, and we call that an inferior good. So sometimes the quantity bought of a product is going to decrease if the consumer's income increases. Now, this may sound implausible at first, but we can think of examples from our own life where this occurs. And some products are only desired by consumers who have very low income because they're cheap, they're not constructed very well, but they're low cost, so people with low incomes are willing to purchase them. They may be secondhand clothes from Goodwill. Once you start making more and more money, you're going to be less likely to shop for secondhand clothes and more likely to buy brand new clothes. It could be cheap food like ramen noodles. College students love ramen noodles because they're so cheap and easy to make. But once you get on the real world and start making money, you'll typically stop purchasing as much ramen noodles or stop purchasing them entirely and opt for higher quality food. Now, income elasticity at +1 represents another dividing line. So at that point, when it's positive, so between 0 and 1, the price elasticity, the income inelasticity is considered, the good is going to be a normal good when it's at that level. But when it's above 1, that's called a superior good or luxury good. So at that point, when your consumption of a good or service increases more or less proportionally than your income. So if your income increases by 10%, but your spending on that good or service increases by more than 10%, those are considered luxuries. So basically, when your income is increasing, you're spending even more money on it. And now let's look at a handful of examples. So in the short run, income elasticity for food expenditures is about 0.5. But the income inelasticity of restaurant meals is 1.6. So restaurant meals is more like a luxury good, because as your income increases, proportionally your spending on restaurant meals is increasing at a higher rate. Now, the short run income elasticity for jewelry and watches in the short run is around 1, but over the long run, we estimate it to be around 1.6. So again, in the long run, these both tend to be luxuries. Now for gasoline, in the short run, the income elasticity is between 0.35 and 0.55, and over the long run, between 1.1 and 1.3. But there are other forms of demand elasticity. Basically, we have elasticity anytime there's a change in one variable that affects demand. So the first example is advertising expenditures. So if you're a decision maker at a firm and you're trying to figure out how an increase in advertising expenses would affect your total sales, you can think of the advertising elasticity of demand and define that as the percentage of a change in the quantity demanded relative to a 1% change in advertising expenses. And economic literature has studied this for a few products. So they did one study about the effect of advertising milk on consumption of milk in New York State. They estimated the elasticities range from 0.041 to 0.088. So there was a small effect, but it tended to be positive. So increasing your advertising expenditures, if you're a milk executive in New York State, is going to slightly increase the quantity demanded by consumers. Another variable that could have a significant impact on demand is the interest rate. Often you don't borrow for a lot of the goods you purchase, but for durable goods, ones that are expensive, you're going to keep for a long time, so like appliances, cars, even houses, the interest rate is going to be very important. You could also calculate the elasticity of demand relative to population size, and there's several other examples. These are a lot less important than the first three elasticities of demand that we talked about. Those are the main ones you'll need to focus on, but there are a lot of other types of elasticities of demand that you can focus on. And when you're trying to make decisions for a business, again, there's a lot of variables that are going to affect demand. So you have to consider how responsive consumer demand is to a change in those various variables. Now we'll end the chapter by looking at the elasticity of supply very briefly. So the price elasticity of supply measures the percentage change in the quantity supplied as a result of a 1% change in price. So basically, this elasticity is a measure of the responsiveness of the quantities provided by firms to a change in price. So in chapter 3, we compiled a supply schedule, and then we used that to actually graph a supply curve, which slopes upwards to the right. But how steep that or shallow that slope is going to be determined by the price elasticity of supply. Now the equation is the same as the price elasticity of demand, except we're replacing the word demand with supply. So elasticity of supply equals the percentage change in the quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in price. Now again, we have the same problem with this very simplified equation, so we need the expanded one. I'm going to spare you the reading it for you. I'm not going to have you calculate the price elasticity of supply. It's easy for me to say, but it's still important that we touch upon it so you understand the concept. So the basic takeaway I want you to understand about the elasticity of supply is that when the supply curve is more elastic, the effect of a change in demand is going to be greater on the quantity than on the price of the product. So when the price elasticity of supply is relatively elastic, firms are going to be more responsive to a change in price with the quantity that they're willing to supply. So the change in quantity that they supply is going to be greater than the change in the price. On the other hand, when the supply curve is less elastic, firms are going to be relatively less responsive to a change in price. So there's going to be a greater effect on the price than on the quantity that producers are willing and able to sell. This global application that's included in the textbook gives us a good example of differences in elasticities around the world. So we have import and export price elasticities of demand and income elasticities of demand for imports and exports. Basically, why I wanted to include this is that it shows that there's no one set price elasticity of demand. There's nothing intrinsic within the product that causes it to have a certain price elasticity of demand or income elasticity of demand or any of these elasticities. It's based upon market conditions. So there's pretty substantial differences between India, Japan, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. So because of that, the same product or the same basket of products can have a completely different price elasticity of demand or income elasticity of demand based on what's going on in those countries. So because there's different markets, we're talking about different groups of consumers, we can end up with different price elasticities of demand. So to summarize the chapter, Elasticity in general is defined as the sensitivity of one variable to another. Now, the main elasticity that we're going to be concerned about in this class is the price elasticity of demand. That is the percentage change in the quantity demanded of a product caused by a percent change in its own price. Goods are relatively elastic, or the demand for goods are relatively elastic, if revenue rises more than the quantity demanded. It goes relatively inelastic when it's not responsive to a change in price. So the quantity demanded increases less than an increase in price, for instance. Now, over the demand curve, over the same demand curve, a good will begin as elastic, so responsive to a change in price. It will move to unit elastic, and remember that's where the total revenue is at its highest. The marginal revenue equals 0. And then moving down the bottom of the demand curve, it will be relatively inelastic. The cross-price elasticity is the relationship between the demand for one product and the price of another product. So how does the price of one product affect how much you're going to sell of a different product? And finally, income elasticity measures the sensitivity of demand for a product to changes in the income of the population. So, it's important to know that if, your potential consumers are making more money, how is that going to affect their willingness and ability to purchase your product?